Hello and welcome to the Learning Experience Operations Show. My name is Jason Gorman. I am joined today by Jen Briselli. Jen is a strategist, designer, researcher, and educator who helps teams realize the transformational potential of risky play, complexity-informed design strategy, and transdisciplinary collaboration. Driven by deep curiosity to understand the hidden patterns across disparate domains and the desire to empower other humans with these insights, and partners with brave folks who work at a similar intersection and want to provoke, create, or occasionally subvert. And I'm just going to editorialize here, Jen, and say, maybe not that occasional. Previously as Chief Design Strategy Officer at MadPow, and now as co-founder of Topology, which is a systems-oriented experience strategy firm. She helps co-create the services, experiences, and the conditions that enable people to live well on their own terms. Welcome to the show, Jen Briselli.
Thank you, Jason. My pleasure to be here.
So I'm trying a new thing. I'm kind of in beta mode with this podcast.
It's awesome.
And the new thing is, you've probably heard, what was that? Inside the Actors Studio, they used to do like that 10 questions at the end. Well, I'm going to do like 10 questions, a little lightning round, but it's at the beginning. And so we're going to do that first. So the rule here is just a sentence or two, no explanations. Right?
It's the worst.
We can circle back.
This is the worst for me. The absolute worst. I want to add, I don't even know what the questions are yet. And I already want to add caveats and color and asterisks and all that. So,
well, you know what? I have a notebook in front of me. I'm going to write stuff down.
All good.
Because I know how this is going to work. I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to say something. So Jen and I know each other a bit. And we hang out and we talk about stuff. And I'm usually writing down stuff when we do that. So I'm imagining that when you're answering these questions, I'm going to write stuff down. We will have the opportunity to go deeper into the brilliant things you say.
It's all good. I will do my best to follow the rules. I'm not a good rule follower, but I will do my best for you.
That. That's why I editorialized there. It's not that occasional. Okay, so first lightning round question. So at the end of the little intro that I just gave for you was the phrase, she helps organizations co-create the services, experiences, and the conditions that enable people to live well on their own terms. So can you give me a sentence or two more on the enable people to live well on their own terms?
It is not for me, us, anybody who is in a facilitative role to dictate what live well means, but rather to make the road or the path to that place easier for someone to travel or to adjust the conditions in which desirable things can emerge without the need for me as a practitioner to define or try to directly drive what that desirable outcome must be. I think that is far more powerful and scalable than trying to define the outcome in my own way and then drive the process to that end.
That's good. That's good.
This one's hard. That's a bad one. Don't ask me that in a lightning round ever again.
Well, I'm going to ask you a second part to that question. Okay. Can you give me a sentence just on what you mean by live well? I think what I would love for people to understand is what's your why.
I think that at the end of the day, I want to help other people achieve whatever they want to achieve. And when I say live well, it could be accomplish a goal, learn a thing, acquire a skill. It could be arrive in a new place. It could just be notice a new thing. It could be get to a certain point in their career. There's so many things that this can be, which is kind of why this question it's so hard for me to even answer because it's so meta. But the point is, I have largely come to see myself as a facilitator of things. That's why I use the word enabler a lot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Being an enabler means I don't get to, but actually I look at it as I don't need to understand deeply exactly what and why someone is trying to accomplish something. What I can do is figure out how to help them do it. And like the secret, of course, ingredient of that is always learning. I know I'm a spoiler, but yeah. So to me, it's about enabling. Do I still apply a moral lens sometimes? Sure. I don't help everybody do everything they want to do. I'm not going to help people do things that I think are morally or ethically problematic. But when we say live well, that's not up to me or you. It's up to them.
I love that. Okay, next question. When you are working and you're totally dialed in, what are you most likely to be doing?
Oh, this question is interesting because I immediately try to think of like when I'm working on my computer, like what am I doing? Am I listening to certain music or whatever? But if I pause and really ask myself, okay, if I'm really dialed in, it's probably when I'm not in front of my computer. It's more likely the times where I am in a room with people. When you say, think of a time you've been really dialed in at work, it's me facilitating something like a workshop or a collaborative session. That's it. It's me in that moment not on stage, because I don't like to be the star in those settings, but actively sensing and responding what's happening in the room and the body language and the plan that we may have laid out that becomes irrelevant within the first 10 minutes, and then kind of co-creating the rest of the collaboration from there.
Great. Okay. Next question. What is a specific or event or moment that inspired you to do what you do?
I'm a disappointment for some of these questions. I know, like, I don't think there is one. I think there's
Valid answer.
My life has been a chain series of these in like every possible sense of the word. Yeah. I'll think more about it as we chat, but I don't have an easy answer to this one because I also don't know what I do. What inspired me to do what I do? Being born as a human in the world and being curious and then following that curiosity. So there was never a moment.
Okay, good. Next question. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self just starting out?
Trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. I think this question often makes you think about like, what would you want to change? Or what would you want to make sure you don't change? But I don't think I would try to actually guide the younger version of me or anyone else for that matter in any way other than that it's been a good ride. So just do what you do. Trust your instincts. They've served you well. Maybe trust them better earlier, sooner.
All right. I know you have an answer to this one. What skill are you trying to pick up right now?
Well, on one hand, I've been learning to play the drums for a little while. So that's maybe not a good answer because I'm like maybe an intermediate now in a couple of years. So maybe that doesn't count as trying to pick up. I'm still going to say that though, because I am working on certain aspects of drumming. So for me, the limb independence is very difficult, especially with my left foot. So I'm working on limb independence.
Limb
On
independence.
my drumming skills. Yes.
I could probably do 1,000 of these episodes. That's probably the only time I'm going to hear limb independence.
Well, when people, it sounds tangential, but people talk a lot about, and anybody in the audience who plays drums or other instruments, like there's that process where you're first learning anything and it's in working memory and you're really conscious of it and you're thinking hard. Like when you're first learning something with the drums and you're counting slow and you feel like you're going like insanely slow. And then over time you get a little bit faster. And then eventually, for me, the experience always feels like the knowledge drops out of my like cognitive conscious working memory and like into my body. And those moments where I realize, wait, this is now stored in my body and my muscles and my brain is free to like add new things and new layers. So like, even if other people on this podcast won't say limb independence, like what limb independence represents to me in the journey of learning how to play the drums is not unlike, I'm sure, what any other answer to that question would be, which is not, I'm trying to acquire the skill of tapping my left foot separately from my right. I am looking forward to the day where my left foot can act independently so that it frees me up for the next level of this thing. Someday, left foot.
Someday, left foot. Last question in the lightning round. What are you most anxious about for the future? Oh boy, I'm sorry. It's a big question, but what's a bite-sized?
Warning. This is an interesting one, and I'm trying to follow the rules, so I'll keep it short. I'm actually not anxious. Maybe I operate from a place of enough privilege. I'm like keenly hyper aware of all the things that one can be anxious about, but for me, it's less of an anxiousness and it's more of an apprehensiveness, and not in the I'm scared apprehensive, but just like I'm taking it all in and I'm really paying attention to a lot of the signals around how young people are learning how to be in this world. And it both brings me a sense of despair when we think about mental health and we think about the roles of social media and AI, but it also brings me a lot of hope and joy when I watch how young people, especially right now, challenge norms and challenge constructs that have not been productive for us as a society and a species. So, everything is both. There's always a little of everything in every question. So I broke the rules, but my answer there is I'm not anxious, but I do think the answer is, what are young people going to do? It's going to be good to see. I look forward to trying to help it along as best I can until I'm not in the process of it all anymore.
Thank you.
That wasn't much of a lightning round. It was more like
I know. I think
maybe like
I have a ways
rainy, longer.
I have a ways to go as a host. I mean, let's just
That's
call
on
it.
Me. You don't want to become too much like a dictator when it comes to this. It's good.
No, definitely not. So you kind of alluded to this before. You have a bit of an unusual background. It has definitely not been a straight line for you. And I wonder if you could give a little bit of a kind of a quick tour of how you got to be doing what you do today.
Yeah.
And then maybe a little bit more color commentary about what you do today really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm sure I also, compared to other guests and maybe compared to a lot of the audience, I don't have a title like instructional designer or learning experience designer, even though I kind of regard what I do as being that at its core, no matter what, but we'll come back to that. The shortest version is I started off my educational journey majoring in physics. So as a kid, like I think a lot of us, I was very curious. I obviously am still very curious. I have all the buzzwords on my resume that we all do. Problem solver, love learning, want to learn about everything, da, 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 da. And to 17-year-old Jen, I would have loved to have studied everything, but you have to pick something. And I kind of at that point was like, well, physics represents like the most fundamental. I'll start there. And it's probably best for me to learn that from other humans. And I can always be picking up and learning other things along the way. So that was my logic. I studied physics, I enjoyed it, but I realized within a couple years in my undergrad that I did not want to go to grad school for physics. I probably would have really loved that, but I didn't want to climb higher in what I saw as like a disciplinary silo. I was already also sort of double majoring, minoring. I forget how it all landed in philosophy and a few other fields. And I didn't want to just be stuck in one place. So it just happened that I'd been doing a lot of peer tutoring. And I was really enjoying that challenge of understanding people's mental models. Physics was a place I had always done well. It's a difficult subject, but I grokked it relatively easily compared to my peers. And I thought it was so fascinating to try to understand somebody else's mental model about physics that would be very different from my own, but trying to help them construct meaning with their own schemas. And I just found that fascinating. If you had told me when I was in high school I was going to become a high school teacher, I would have told you to just F right off because it was like not at all part of my like future vision of myself. I had a lot of preconceived notions about teachers that I think a lot of people do. Those who can't teach, that whole thing. So I was very much not at all. I was a surprise teacher is what had happened for me. But I did, because I'd been doing all that peer tutoring, I thought to myself, isn't this actually what teachers do? What if I should become a teacher? So I went and in the process of finishing my degree, I minored in education as well. And I went and became a high school physics teacher. And I did that for almost a decade. I loved it at first. I loved teaching. I loved figuring out how to help people do everything I just described. But after a few years, I started to feel like I was living kind of like the movie Groundhog Day. And I didn't have this language at the time, but I definitely felt like I was being handed the same design brief and asked to solve the same problem in a different way, which some people love. I have plenty of friends who are still teachers. They love knowing that they do the same thing on day 63 every year because it gives them a benchmark to continue to grow and advance their practice. So that there's no shade on that way of working. But for me, I just serendipitously had also started to learn about the world of information design and then by extension, experience design. I didn't know any of that stuff existed when I was younger. And I realized I'm designing learning experiences. I want to figure out how to design other kinds of experiences because the process by which you get into someone's mind and understand how they make sense of the world, that sense making that you do, I was so intrigued by that being applied to other domains. So cutting a much longer story shorter, I did leave the classroom. I went back to grad school and I studied service design and strategy. And there was a lot of systems thinking as part of that. And so then moved into the world of, what folks would know now as UX or experience design and strategy, and spent some time at a couple different agencies. I was at a place called MadPow for a long time and moved up through levels of leadership there. And towards the end was in an executive role, which was very eye-opening, and then I think you mentioned now founded my own little thing, Typology. So what I do is kind of the marriage of that entire narrative journey. It's easy for me to draw a thread right along through. I think some people could look at that on a resume and go, physics, teacher, designer, you're a weirdo. Like, yeah, but I look back now and can recognize that I don't care about learning now because I was a teacher. I ended up being drawn to teacher because even before teaching, learning was kind of just core for me. I would not have had this language until the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, even when I'm working with clients in, big corporate sort of organizational challenges, whether it's improving the experience for their customers or improving experiences for their internal employees, or figuring out how to help people work together more effectively, like none of those things have the word learning tacked onto them in the title. But like the secret thing is that there's always some form of learning involved, and the better and more effective that individuals, teams, and large groups can learn, the better they're going to achieve whatever their other goals are. So in some ways, I look at any goal that a client ever comes to me with as the secondary goal behind the secret primary goal, which is learning. So I'm like a secret learning experience designer, but you won't see that in most of my sales materials because I think a lot of people don't recognize that. The uniqueness of the learning experience design field is that you guys, we get to talk about it explicitly. So.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because there's a real, especially in learning and development, which is a term that's typically reserved for corporate, like this work and in corporations. There's this like real hesitancy to use the word learning, especially to describe the outcome of what you're trying to do. So it's really more about like performance, behavior change. Yep. And we'll get to some of those things, later in this conversation, but it's I don't know, kind of refreshing that you're just describing that as a core goal.
Yeah. I mean, to me, learning is such a hard word. You and I have talked about this already in the past, but
yeah,
it's hard to say the word learning and not immediately have a lot of different things that flash through someone's mind. They think of formal classroom learning. They think of learning and development in a corporate setting, which most people boil down to training. Or they think about learning as in learning loops, as in how do we get feedback about the product we're trying to launch, or, those kind of things. But it's always flattened into this very reductionist and unfortunately oftentimes either transactional or performative metric. And I mean, we all have to work with some of that stuff in the world that we're in, but I will always be over here kind of trying to reserve learning as this like 4-dimensional concept that is really just a fundamental innate property of living things and our ability to take in information about our environment and take action and see what happens and then adjust course and adapt. Like to me, learning means adaptation, period. And it isn't just a human that does it. It's humans do it in concert together. Humans do it in concert or in reaction to their environment. And it can be, living environments as well as non-living environments. So if you follow that too far, you get way too philosophical. So, like I said, generally you have to kind of speak the language of the environment you're trying to be effective inside. But the thing inside the Trojan horse is always learning.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was probably not so totally different when you were a physics teacher, right? Those kids they weren't waking up in the morning and being like, "Oh, physics class today, can't wait." Probably, maybe if you're really lucky, a couple were.
Rude, like. I'm just kidding. But most people I know, like they think back to physics if they took physics in school, and like one of two things are true. They hated their physics teacher because they were dry and boring and it was hard and they just did a terrible time, or they loved their physics teacher. Something about physics. I once had somebody, I wish I could remember who said this to me. I would love to credit this person, but they once told me that they've always thought of physics majors as two types. There are the types of physics majors who want to like really study the laws of physics. They get into astronomy. It's all about kind of categorizing and all that. And then there are the people who study physics like it's a liberal art. It's a way of thinking. And I was like, oof, you got me, like 100% the latter. But I say that because you could almost imagine two kinds of physics teachers, that are like the kind of teacher that they make like Mr. Holland's Opus type movies about, or you get like, I'm a physics teacher who wants to just make sure you memorize and understand Newton's laws. But to that end, you take a class of 30 kids and there are kids in that room who are in that class purely because it's a college prereq and they just want their A. And you have kids in that class who don't even want to be in there, regardless of it being a prereq, and they're there because their parents or someone else is making them. And then there are kids who, for whatever reason they're in there, it doesn't matter. They actually love it. And the point I want to make, and I think this is true for all of the people we collaborate with, is you don't know who it is right away. You won't know. You won't know until even years after they're gone and out of the class. You can say, I know this kid's in here because of this reason, but students who reached out to me years and years later weren't always the ones I expected. So you don't know that when you're thinking about who you're doing your learning experience design work for as well.
It's so true. I love that point. I think all the time about, we do this work. I think of it as setting the stage to help people use the word enabling, right? To set the stage to help people think, to change their lives, to arrive at some kind of aspiration that they have for themselves, to become something different or better that they want for themselves. I think a good designer helps give people the conditions that they can do that on their own terms. And that's sort of what you said earlier.
Yeah. In fact, your answer right now was actually a way better answer to the lightning question than the one I gave. So we should just go edit
that in.
Edit your answer in for mine. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm curious. So you, from the teaching to the design that you do now, I'm wondering if there's, an operating principle around doing your work that kind of survived through these jobs?
Yeah, I think there's actually two good answers to this. The first, is probably the one people will find more useful, is that I think there's a really important difference between teaching and facilitating learning. They're not like mutually exclusive, but they are not the same thing. And I think that applies to any kind of practice that is meant to be enabling other people. So I think other things that fall into this category would be things like people management or even just facilitation as its own skill set. These are things that also are the fields where people assume that if you can do the thing, then you can teach the thing, or you can manage the thing, or you can facilitate other people doing the thing. And nobody really respects that there's like a skill set unto itself, which, again, see modern society views of teachers and such, which, there's all kind of other things caught up in that. But to that end, I think that understanding that teaching kind of implies something that is different than facilitating learning. And good teaching is facilitating learning, but it's not an automatic. And so take that now and draw the parallels into the world of design or any other kind of experiential kind of based work where you're trying to design curriculum or you're trying to support other people who are in an educational or training or development kind of role. There's a difference between the active verb of me doing a thing that achieves a thing either for you or on your behalf, or me trying to arrange the conditions, move the constructs into place, put the tools in your hands, put the apprenticeship models in place, whatever it needs to be, so that you then engage in and make the meaning for yourself. Teaching versus facilitating learning, designing an outcome versus facilitating an experience, take that and multiply it to all the different contexts. That to me has been the key. I'm far more committed and passionate about facilitating the thing that needs to emerge because it's far more effective, even if it feels indirect at first. I've seen it with my own eyes. I have another answer to that question, though, which has actually been the true guiding light for me, which comes from a story. One time I was with my dad, who before he retired, worked for years in construction. He's an engineer and he worked as basically a project manager for very large construction projects, big name, high profile things. And so one time I think I was in high school, maybe even middle school, and we were going out to eat. We were sitting and waiting for our table to be ready with the whole family. And I was just making conversation, asked my dad how his job was going. And he said something like, well, drywall is supposed to be up by Friday. It's not yet. I told the electrical guys that they can go ahead and start on Monday regardless. Or sorry, I reversed it. So obviously electrical is supposed to go in before drywall. And he was like basically telling me he was going to have drywall go up on Monday regardless. And I was like, wait, but what if the electricians don't get done? And he was like, too bad. The drywall's going up on Monday. And if the electrical's not in, then it's going to be on the electricians to go in and put it in. And then they're going to have to pay for the cost of redoing the drywall. He would take it out of their invoice. And I remember being, and this was very typical of things my dad would share. This is, those of you who have any connections to the world of construction, this won't actually be that crazy to you. But I remember being, like 13 or something and thinking to myself, my God, that sounds crazy. Like, what if they call your bluff? What if they don't get it done? And and he was like, and I was like, isn't that kind of irresponsible? Like, you're the main guy. And he looks me dead on and he goes, I'll never forget this. He goes, Jen, key to life is that sometimes you have to be marginally irresponsible. And I was like, what a weird thing for my dad to tell me at age 13 or 14. But I've never forgotten it. And I think that there's a key here that it isn't just be irresponsible. It's be marginally irresponsible. And if you are faced with a moment where you're kind of unsure, this goes back to follow your instincts. There's a lot of gain to be had from being marginally irresponsible, taking those small risks, figuring out what your affordable losses could be. And that's where that concept of risky play and, kind of small bets and probes and experiments, I think, are so key. So my guiding principle from the moment I went from being a physics major who thought I would be a physicist to go, wait, I'm going to go be a physics teacher. Everybody in my life is telling me I'll be overeducated and it's career suicide. But in my heart of hearts, I wanted to do that. And that's when I said, this feels a little irresponsible, but I'm going to do it. And then fast forward 10 years, I'm a teacher and I'm thinking about leaving that behind, the pension, the job security, and going back to school and spending a ton of money on a master's degree and then entering a wholly new field. Again, people are like, that's crazy. And I was like, it feels irresponsible, but it's what I want to do. And it's not like, I'm not going to put my house and husband and life at risk. It's not insanely irresponsible. It's just marginally irresponsible. So multiply that by many more times. And here I am today.
One comment, and then I want to follow up on that because that's very interesting. Comment was, I was definitely not attacking you as a physics teacher.
Oh, I know that.
Actually, I loved physics. I was one of those people who I generally didn't love science, but I did love physics. And even though I wasn't great at it, I actually lobbied to be in the harder physics class because it was so
what a
fun.
Nerd. What a nerd.
And I had this, it was pretty nerdy. And I had this physics teacher he was probably in his late 70s. And he was almost certainly the smartest person I've ever known. He had done some kind of top secret something somewhere, and he certainly didn't have to work. He was only working because we asked him, why are you doing this? And he said, because I'm learning stuff from you.
Yes.
Right. That was his answer. Anyway, I had a very good experience with
just for the record. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yes. No offense taken. I was just giving you a hard time.
No, I know.
The tropes, though, they do exist for a reason, and we're talking about physics, but it exists for any kind of domain. Anybody that might be listening to this can probably imagine. And so that's kind of why I thought it was kind of hilarious to think about.
Well, there's a little bit of a serious thing in there too, which is that, I guess what I really meant when I said that is that 17 years old.
Yeah.
I just wasn't thinking about school. Like if I had to list the things I cared about and wanted to do, school was not on the top 10. And I don't think I was nerdy and I wasn't on my top 10s.
Even the kids who did think they wanted, loved school, the good, I was a good kid, but I was a good kid because I also kind of learned that being a good kid earned me a lot of freedom. Freedom was the principle for me at that age, but it was, I think that it still rings true. I mean, it's, you don't really know when you're a teenager what is meaningful to you. And then we kind of assume you get to a certain point in your life later where, things are more fully formed. It's not wet cement anymore. Mm-hmm. But I actually think it's wet cement until the day you die, So I think that the same challenge you would face as a physics teacher or any kind of teacher of children or young adults, anybody here who, does any kind of adult learning knows that those things they're the wet cement nature of the human brain and experience and cognition. It stays wet forever. And I think the more that folks can grapple with that and acknowledge that, the better learning will happen.
You said, was the term marginally irresponsible? Is that right?
Phil Briselli, everybody, shout out.
Very nice. I when you were saying that, I was thinking about some of the words that you chose for, I ask people to write their intros. Just it's a big reveal if anybody's listening. But so you're using terms like risky play, complexity informed design strategy, transdisciplinary collaboration. So when I think about these things, and because I know you, I know that it's not like you are coming in and doing a kind of straightforward, replicable thing for your clients, right? You are coming in and you are, I would imagine, bringing that marginal irresponsibility with you because it creates an environment where more unexpected things can happen. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about a specific project that you've done recently that really kind of explains what you do in concrete terms, but then also gets a little bit into some of that kind of interesting process. And because I think for me, like one of the theories that I have about work is that there's this tight, constant tension between defined process and some improvisation. I love that and what you just described, and I'm hoping you can tease that out about what you do.
Yeah. I think that the word that I hear, especially as you tee this up, is scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
You want process to be scaffolding that, like when a building is being constructed, the scaffolding, provides some support, makes the construction of something easier, safer, or just possible. But scaffolding itself isn't meant to be permanent or, something that is crystallized and rigid and therefore more fragile. So if you think about like scaffolding, like we see on construction sites and on buildings, is usually made of some kind of metal, but like historically people have used things like bamboo as scaffolding. And you can also think about the human skeleton as a form of scaffolding. So, you can extend the metaphor wherever you want, but I think that tension is a good creative tension if you can maintain the flexibility or the impermanence of, or the whatever you want to use for an adjective of that scaffolding or that process. And I think a lot of folks will over rely on a process for a couple reasons that can become dysfunctional, namely that there isn't trust in the ability to actually sense and adapt, to any kind of incoming information. So you want to rely on or offload the cognitive weight of that onto a process that we've all agreed is good and safe. Or from like a relational angle, if you're in an environment, in an organization where it's not safe to take risks, you want to make sure that what you're doing is aligned to a process, because then you can use that as cover. So we're not talking about process like that, but I'll give you an example. I mean, the work we do is, there's kind of like it spans the gamut, right? There are definitely partnerships and engagements that would look familiar to a lot of people where we might come in and help do some research, qualitative research with humans to understand, needs, expectations, whatever. And we might help our clients synthesize what we learn from that research. And then
around what though? Like what kind of?
Well, in like anything experience related. The reason I was going to stay high level was to compare it to something, but it's a good point. So like using a specific product, or a specific tool. We did some stuff this summer actually that I would consider a very conventional project, which was helping an ed tech VR company that does a lot in the nurse education space. And they are very effective and highly regarded in like nursing schools, but they're interested in using their technology or offering it to the post-licensure nurse education world. So of course, their tools are already really effective in some contexts, but in this case, how do we understand what nurses who are already working are doing and where would these kind of tools fit in for them? And there's a difference between going into that process at the like feature and content level. Like, well, what are the different features and content they need? And what is the curriculum and the pedagogical kind of structure of that need to be? We weren't even talking at that level. They were like, we just want to get a better understanding of what this entire group of humans post-licensure nurse education. What is it even like, and what are their needs? And are they different than, spoiler, of course they're different than what they are in nursing school. So we did a bunch of research to talk to a lot of folks, nurse educators and others in a lot of different care settings too. Think about the difference between a hospital or a long-term care environment or an at-home care setting. And the research can look a lot of different ways, interviews and site visits and observations and narrative inquiry, whatever. Point is, we're trying to understand something about an experience, but it isn't just, is this a satisfactory experience? It's the whole context and the context dependence of every piece and part. And then what comes out of that isn't just prioritize this content or, do these features first and try them out with this client. It's more about the overarching themes or principles that can actually be abstracted that maintain their usefulness across contexts where things are so different. And then that gives them a bit of more of a starting point to say, okay, well, let's prioritize here, 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 here. But, they can go on and figure out exactly which content, exactly which kind of features, they'll get the most bang for their buck or have the most overlap with things that are already on their roadmap. But operating at that just slightly higher than, not content and features level to understand, but not so high that we're just doing marketing research, because they had plenty of that. They've had their other vendors come in and do their market landscapes and all that. So that's a good example of like very conventional help, understand something about experience, figure out what it means. And we do that as collaboratively as possible. That sense making process is far more effective if I'm facilitating the client doing that rather than me just delivering recommendations. And then something comes out of that, and whatever it is, it's less about the artifact. Is it a playbook? Is it recommendations? Is it a plan? Is it a map? Like, it could be so many things. It's all of those are just containers for the information that then guides or, continues a process forward. And again, it's learning in a way, but that's a good example of what I would consider a kind of like, I've just described like a process. And you could turn that into the double diamond if you're familiar with the double diamond, or versions of it and all the other kind of design and strategy processes that are out there. Yeah, we did some research. We did some synthesis. I talk a lot about sense making and then decision making. You can talk about divergent and convergent phases. All of these apply. But I want to contrast that with another kind of project that we do a lot. And that is when someone says, I don't need that. I just need your help figuring something out. We have to do XYZ thing and we're not sure how. And this is the most difficult kind of thing for me to explain, because what does the case study look like? It's different and unique for every client. So it's like, we did this for this client, but it's not what you need. So like, how do you even talk about it? But I'll give the example of a large healthcare organization who we'd done some other work with them. So they knew a little bit about how we work and how I bring complexity science and learning into this process. And they just said, we need to engage a bunch of people from across the enterprise in a bunch of individual kind of topic deep dive workshop sessions. For lack of a better way to say it, they were like, we need to run a bunch of workshops and bring a bunch of people together to kind of put heads together on some things where the container is all that's been defined. Get humans in a room. And I was like, do you want the outcome like to be, what are you talking about for outcomes here? I mean, are you looking to have a roadmap at the end of each of these days for the next year? Or are you looking to have ideas? Are you looking to have experiments identified? What are you looking for? And they were very open-ended about it. That's not very common. But the other reality is, even when someone says, no, we don't expect to have a roadmap at the end of a 6-hour session, but the answer is like, yes, secretly we do. So you have to kind of uncover what the real needs are, right? But that was a good example where in that case, anybody who was kind of involved in the work would probably have described it as Jen in topology came in and helped plan and design and then actively facilitate this highly collaborative, very interesting series of workshops. In some ways looked like most other workshops you've ever been to, and in other ways was very different. And her facilitation style isn't like her at the front of the room being the expert. It's kind of the opposite of that. If I do a good job, they forget I was ever there that day. But that's it. They would have just said it was a workshop and it got brains together in a room. And suddenly we all were able to connect the dots between our roles. Some of us didn't realize other people, had connections to the same particular thing we're talking about. And the topics I'm bringing up, I'm leaving generic on purpose, but they were performance-based things that this organization needed to improve, on certain metrics or performance indicators. And it was basically a function of bringing people together and letting the cognitive diversity of everybody in that room highlight where there were opportunities or where there was potential and what were the many small but right next steps and actions they could start taking the very next day to start making some meaningful progress. And so part of that, of course, when I do these kind of projects is I deliver something afterwards, a summary of what we uncovered or whatever. But in this kind of a scenario, nobody waits around for that, because if it's done well, literally the next day, something's already moving. And I just send a PDF later that no one needs to open. So I contrast those two kind of projects, though, because those look very different in their structure. They are both using the exact same set of skills, which is listening for, trying to understand where there are signals that we need to read that we're not reading, or uncover, information we don't have, or fill in knowledge gaps or what have you. But more importantly, it's also a matter of creating the other phrase I like to use a lot is creating a safe space for dangerous thinking. It doesn't have to literally be dangerous, but in those workshop settings or in the work to do the research around this particular market for this tool, you can follow a very standard process that everybody has seen and known, and then all you're doing is really executing something that somebody else just doesn't have the time for. But in this case, and I think in what a lot of people who probably are going to listen to this podcast are far more interested in, is that extra layer of I can bring in something, whether it's an interesting perspective or a little provocation, or in my case, it's more about like, we're just going to carve out a space where you can actually explore things that you didn't get to explore elsewhere, or you wouldn't feel safe exploring elsewhere in this organization because you'd be sticking your neck out in a way that could be bad for your career. So outsiders get the opportunity to provide that more than insiders, unfortunately, but also really, because that's just the balance we strike. So I don't know if that helps, if it answers what you're asking, but
yes. And, if I have many critiques of my own field, of, learning experience design, learning operations. One of them is that we tend to rush much too fast to, converging on solutions. And I don't know why that is. I think maybe we're not given the room oftentimes to do that kind of divergent activity that you're talking about. And, you are really one of the people that that got me really thinking about taking that more seriously in my own practice and at what we do at Jackrabbit. But I'm wondering if you could maybe think about the Venn diagram between what you do and how you work your practice, and then what a person who's responsible for building some kind of training or learning program does. And where is that overlap? What does that look like? And maybe what's inside the little overlapping slice, and maybe what's the stuff that feels like it probably isn't going to come into the work of.
I give a fast answer, which is it's a circle. It's all overlapping. But in the spirit, no, I think it's a good question.
No, go. It's a terrible question.
It's worth unpacking a little. No, stop. You're doing great.
I'm just trying to be self-deprecating in a funny way. That's all.
This is, it's actually it's an interesting question to unpack, because truthfully, on a lot of the work that I do, and I think people who work in the way I do, if they're good at what they do, they're actually approaching most of these kind of engagements in the same way as somebody who is thinking about who's my audience and what are they bringing. They're not empty boxes. We know this. They're not blank slates. They're not empty boxes. So much training and development is like, well, we just know that they don't have this and then they need it. So it's going from a not have to a have. But we all know that's completely reductionist and not at all accurate. So I'm not even going to entertain it. But we have to think about who the audience is. What are they bringing? What is the context? Everything is context dependent in a complex system. And then with all of that in mind, what am I trying to help enable? And if you are designing a training, or if you are trying to design a research process, or you're trying to outline an experiment or a probe or a prototype, in any of these scenarios, you're still operating in that kind of structure or the overlap in the Venn diagram. The short version to answering this, as much as I hate to do it, is to say that these are all rhetorical arts or craft. And I say rhetorical as in like the actual ancient Roman and Greek art of rhetoric, like Aristotle rhetoric, not like art of lying rhetoric, but the actual craft of rhetoric where you have to understand your audience and you have to uncover and think through, rhetoricians would say lines of reasoning or arguments, but less about persuasion and more what are going to be the doorways or the portals in or the levers by which somebody can take something they didn't have before and now use, whether it's a skill, whether it's knowledge, whether it's a new tool they need to use, whether it's information that comes from a research study. I think good designers and strategists are naturally also, by virtue of being good at that, they have to be good at designing learning experiences. And I think good learning experience designers and everybody who would be in that field or adjacent is a good designer and strategist. So I only half joke when I say the Venn diagram is a circle, but I also think probably the place where they separate is how narrowly constrained the people who are either sponsoring your work or who are setting out the objectives, how narrowly constrained their viewfinder is. So in my work and a lot of the design and strategy stuff that isn't going to use terms like learning, they've got a kind of bigger or different viewfinder around what they're doing, which gives me a little more leeway to say, well, I don't have to use this language. I'll use this language or, et cetera, versus if someone is literally asking for a learning experience or a training or a development roadmap or whatever it needs to be, you are more constrained in the language that you use and in the activities or the methods by which you achieve it. But the philosophical approach to me is pretty much the same.
I think in your LinkedIn profile, I'm not sure it's there anymore, but I think you used to have the words chaotic good. Is that still, is it still like it's excellent.
Yeah.
You want to make it clear to people that this is a space that you inhabit, you want to inhabit, and then you have a lot of value, right, in that space. I think we have a hard time in general in learning professionals, way too many people on LinkedIn. We can just single that out. Will complain about how they're not being taken seriously enough by their own organization, or they're not allowed to actually do the kind of work that you just described. And it's endlessly, and it should be endlessly frustrating to people. And when people ask me, what do I do if I don't have that? I give them ideas for advocating for it. And then I say, but if you don't get those, then you need to quit your job. You're never going to get, you're right. This stuff is incredibly important, but you're right. I think it does have a lot to do with what is the person in leadership position looking for. But I think there are things that we should be able to do to help people understand why those things are valuable.
Yes. And I would also say this, everybody in my field actually has that exact same complaint. So you hear
right?
Everybody who's listening to me talk about how I'm talking about my field and who's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be an instructional designer anymore. I want to go off and do what Jen does. No, because come to my LinkedIn feed and it's also full of design and experience and systems and complexity folks who for various reasons are all lobbying the same complaints. What I do is being reduced and flattened down to XYZ, right? Design is having this existential crisis again, where it seems like not only 15 years ago, there were lots of arguments about the difference between UX and UI and design having a role, a seat at the table and blah, blah, blah. This design is more than making it pretty. Yeah. Well, we got a seat at the table, and it's a table that is basically controlled by shareholder driven, profit motive quarterly earnings reports. So how is that going for you? But I think that it's probably, there's a reason that this particular topic actually comes up in almost every conversation I have with folks like this. I don't think it's in every single field, but it isn't unique to design. It's not unique to learning. It's also very common in a lot of systems and complexity communities, people who have gotten very, very interested in either systems thinking or complexity science in recent years, and the way you can apply that to all kinds of things, consulting, management, et cetera. There's always this kind of moment of like, oh, this is incredible, or this work is so important, and then fast forward, cut to, they don't get what we do. I don't know how to advocate. The leaders should be doing this or that, and they flatten what I'm trying to do, or they constrain it to this. And what I have to say to that is, until the larger economic systems that we're operating in shift, which I hope happens, I think there are things happening that will lead us to that, but that's not happening anytime soon, overnight, et cetera. So I am very much a proponent of a way of thinking about the present as the thing you have to work with. I know it sounds counterintuitive because future and future vision and the transformative power of imagination is really important. Visions of the future can help us get really, like easily unstuck from status quos. But at the end of the day, the material that I have to design with is the present. And the present has a dispositional state, which means there are certain things that are going to be more doable than others. And if I can work with the dispositional state of the present or with the current energy of the system, then I can achieve what I want to achieve more effectively. And so when it comes to that crisis of my leaders don't understand the value of my work, they reduce what I'm supposed to do to being this small part of the process, but I should be involved over here in this bigger way, or nobody understands this craft or profession. It's so constrained, it's ineffective. First of all, y'all need to go find each other. So like learning and design and systems and complexity people need to go find each other and realize you're all sharing that frustration. But at the same time, like, don't wait for Superman. No one's coming to come in, and no magic leader anywhere is going to suddenly make it. I mean, there are definitely orgs that are exceptions and leaders that are exceptions, but I have long looked at this as sort of similar to language learning, where yes, you can teach someone grammar. Yes, you can teach someone why it's important to be able to speak a language or speak it correctly. But the more effective way is through immersion. So I have simply learned everything I've been curious enough to learn about, and I find ways to fold it into my practice. Do I tell my clients that what I'm doing is this kind of design, or I'm involving a certain component of complexity science? No, unless they're interested and they want to hear about it. Usually they're not. But I do it. I fold it into what I'm doing, and by virtue of people's proximity to me and my work, they might sense you're doing that a little differently than I would have anticipated. Talk to me about why. Can I learn more about this? And the folks who are interested, then it grows through proximity. They want to also be involved. And then the influence of a certain way of working has its own momentum. And you don't have to wait for a C-suite executive to have the epiphany or the bravery to go against whatever conventional management wisdom might be and say, yeah, designers, learning professionals, etc. Here you go. Blank check. No timeline. Do what you need to do that's going to be right for the customer or the learner. You don't have to wait for that to happen. You kind of start to build the practice, and then people kind of start through immersion and proximity to support the momentum or the flywheel. That is very abstract. Like, I realize I'm speaking in like generalities, but I just have to honor the frustration that you pointed out, and it's shared by so many people. And it's not a solution, but the reason I don't feel bogged down by it is that of course, I'm outside of an organization. I intentionally am outsider on purpose, but I think that even then I still have to convince somebody else in the value of what I'm doing to invite me in and pay me for it. And I don't need them to agree that design or learning or this or that is the most important thing in the world. I just need them to trust that I can help them achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And then I go off and do exactly what I know needs to be done, and I earn the right to keep doing more of it. And I think a lot more people actually are a lot more capable of that than they recognize.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's an element to what you're saying where it sounds like you don't always have to ask for permission to go do the things. Go do the things. Prove that they're useful. Don't even do them formally. You can do them informally. You can have all kinds of other things in your organization, other people, other ideas, inform what you're doing. Don't go to your boss and ask them if it's okay to do that. Just go ahead and do it and let it be part of what you do. And then down the line, you can expose some of those things. One of the things I mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to circle back around to it. I have a question about behavior change, but I don't even know if it's the right question to ask. So I'm actually going to call an audible on myself. Here's what we're going to do. If behavior change is the right thing for me to ask you a question about, can you come up with the best question and then answer it? And if it isn't the right question, can you come up with a better question? The reason that this is an important question, as I mentioned before, is that a lot of people in learning operations are being held accountable for some sort of measurable change, understandably. And I have I get it. I know why that's true, and it makes sense. But it's hard. It's really hard to measure change in this field. We're not talking about like clicks on a web page. So when we're thinking about change, should we be thinking about behavior change? What's the right question, and then how would you answer it?
Ugh. Really, you're making me do a lot more work here, Jason.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I want people to get their money's worth.
So is it the right question? Yes and no. I think, and you've kind of alluded to this, I do think behavior change and behavior itself as a target or metric is sexy and appealing because it is visible and measurable. And, there are all these platitudes about like, you can't manage what you can't measure. Bullshit. First of all, I call on that. But second, like, I understand the dynamic, which is we need to have some level of confidence that this thing we did or money we invested had some desirable outcome. And therefore we have to know how to measure success. And then when you start talking about learning, we're all in like philosophy land. And does it feel good on the inside? Yes, great. Like that's not going to cut it. So I understand it. And I actually think there are definitely some contexts and scenarios where behavior is a very good indicator of something that has changed, and it has been a result of a learning process. So it's not like I would throw it away as an indicator, but I would say it is but one thing. And I would like more people to think a little bit more broadly about how you might measure learning. But the other thing is also just the notion of measurement in general. I'm sure many of your listeners are already familiar with Goodhart's law, or whatever version of it out there they might have heard, which is any measure that becomes a target ceases to be a good measure. So is your goal to measure for informational and sort of, guiding purposes, or are you creating a target to use as a carrot or a stick to drive some kind of process? In some ways, it's, at least in the learning world, you can talk about formative versus evaluative, right? It's not language I can use with a lot of people, but at least here it's the same idea. So I think behavior as a way of identifying what success can look like is meaningful, especially when you think about health and health-related behaviors, or you think about user or customer or learner-driven behaviors. So you set the goal. What I'd like to be able to do is have left foot independence. What's my target behavior? That I can play this song at this speed with my left foot hitting the right beats. In that case, that's meaningful to me, the learner, and it's a visible, measurable thing. So it might give me a bit of a motivational boost when I see that I'm actually making progress. I didn't realize I was, but I measured my beats per minute, and so there's value. But my contrast to that, my yes and / let me contradict everything I just said, is that behavior is actually a severely limited way of thinking about what actually happens when humans learn. That's simple as that. A behavior is one of the most prominent aspects of most of the behavior change design practice and practitioners that I know, and people that I really respect and have taught me a lot about that world. One of the first things they always highlight is that if you're going to identify behavior change targets, the actual behavior needs to be visible and measurable. Otherwise, it's not a target for change. That makes a lot of logical sense, but it also constrains literally everything you're doing to something that can actually show up as a change in behavior. And it kind of discounts anything that isn't that behavior. Changes in attitudes, changes of intentions, changes of the way you interact with other humans, all of which can have other effects on things. So to try not to make this go on too long, what I would say is the question, I don't even know what the question should be, but I think the provocation should be to respond to behavior change with a bit of a like, yes, and also what else? Because there are a lot of domains where you can measure, and I'm saying measure, not make a target out of, but you can measure how effective something is in more narrative-based ways and indirect ways that will let you get at those things that are kind of intangible, but still meaningful and still lead to desirable outcomes. Because look, at the end of the day, I mean, the equation is you're trying to go from the current state to some future state that is for some reason more desirable. It's as simple as that, right? You're trying to go from current to preferred. Good old Herb Simon and his definition of design. So if you're going to do that, how will you know if the future state you arrive at is more preferred or not? Usually we try to predefine it. We can go, oh, we hit it. There's another way to do it. And that is to not do that, but to rather try things and interventions that you have reason to think could lead to preferred outcomes. And then along the way, pause and go, where are we right now? Is where we're at better than where we were? Yeah. Okay, then let's keep going. If it's not, okay, let's try some other things. It's a little bit like the difference between plotting that roadmap, here's my destination and I've plotted my course to get there. And then of course, I'm going to drive along and then hit a mountain or hit a roadblock or hit something that I can't drive through and then realize I've got to go off course and then I've lost track of everything versus I just know that I need to head north. North is a better place to be, but it's okay if I go this way, that way, this way, that way. And at every moment in time, stop and orient myself. Are we headed north? No. If we're not headed north, but we're still doing what we need to be doing to get to north eventually, okay. If not, let's turn around and get going north. This is something that, deserves way more conversation, and I'm not doing it a lot of justice. But if any of your listeners are curious, there's a concept called the vector theory of change. A guy named Dave Snowden and others have talked a lot about it. I think it's compelling. I think it's a nice way to contrast a more linear, logical theory of change that most behavior change is built on. It's more about momentum and direction than it is about desired end states being predefined. So that's what I'll say.
Oh, let's say I'm a VP at an 80,000 person organization.
Yeah. Woof, bummer.
That has, the organization just has, an insatiable hunger for concrete metrics about everything. Just that's what it does. And I know that that I'm responsible to certain metrics around people's performance and their behavior on the job. How would you counsel me to both, I can't not do that, right? I have to hit these targets. But how do I do that kind of, I forget how you put it, that like directional piece along the way?
So in order to be able to do that, you have to have the ability. I know that phrase sense and respond I've used a few times is like everywhere now. It's becoming a bit, I don't know, its own stereotype. But I like to use that as a way to kind of talk about this and unpack what do those two words literally mean. In order to be able to navigate this increasingly volatile VUCA world, whatever you want to get into there, or just to understand that what you're working in is probably a complex adaptive system. Not all workplaces and challenges are, but this is why complexity science I find so valuable these days, because most are. In order for that to be effective and to navigate effectively through those environments, the word sense, like you have to somehow be able to sense what is happening in more real time and reliable ways. I'll come back to that. And you have to be able to respond to it. So even if you're really good at sensing what's going on or reading the signals or measuring or tracking, whatever you need to track, if you can't respond to it in an agile way and it takes you 9 months to redo a strategy for something, then you're in trouble. So it's both pieces. And so my counsel for someone in that role, and this is one of the reasons I often put in my bio that I work with brave leaders, because sometimes it's an act of bravery to even go against conventional wisdom in the world of management science. But it actually boils down to figuring out how in your organization can you effectively sense what is happening. So if we're talking about employees and performance or engagement, it doesn't mean always having those metrics that we're used to talking about be the carrot or the stick, but it can mean other ways of measuring how people are experiencing their work. And that, people go right to like, is it pulse surveys? Like, yeah, maybe if it's effective, but there are actually lots of really good tools and methods out there. Something called like narrative inquiry or naturalized sense making that uses narrative processes where you can actually just solicit from your people quick stories about what it is like in their work, which sounds like, oh, this is a little bit hokey and therapeutic, right? No, because actually en masse in like large quantitative scale collections of that kind of insight, you will see strong hotspots and signals like this group or this segment or these people in these roles or these people in this tenure or whatever, patterns are going to emerge. those are going to be way more useful than a lot of the conventional metrics about performance. And then the other part of it is, how do you respond when you see those signals? It's not assign those guys a training, fire that group, put them on a PIP, whatever. It's context dependent. Talk to those people and find out what is preventing them from doing their jobs more effectively, or whatever it is you're measuring. I went right to like employee engagement, but that was just to keep it concrete. So again, like, the advice is not really radically overhaul what you do, but is be a little bit more open to methods that are not using metrics as targets, and really reinvest in the idea of measuring as temperature checking. And you've got a better sense of, it's too hot over here, it's too cold over here. You can then go figure out, what do you guys need to be hotter or colder? And trusting, distributing the decision-making power, giving people enough autonomy or agency, up to a tolerable limit, like financially or otherwise, to do what they need to do their jobs effectively. Proves remarkably successful. The hardest part of everything I'm talking about is not actually doing it. It is just this like leap of faith that I think it feels like, to let go of a lot of the conventional ways people are taught to manage large organizations. And I have to acknowledge, it's not always doable, because if you're a VP in an 80-person, 1,000 firm, you're probably not the one who gets to decide that. You are working with a bunch of other peer, and probably a tier or two above you, and then a number of people below you. And so to that, I would say, and I think your previous comment was really spot on, you don't always have to make this a big thing that we all buy into and advocate a big change. Sometimes it's just, what is within your local sphere of influence? And where can you start incorporating some of these kind of ideas just within what is yours? And if you're a VP, that might be bigger. If you're a junior level designer or a learning person somewhere, it's you and 2 other people. Fine. Start finding ways to experiment with what I'm talking about. I also thought I would just mention too, I think people are really quick to think metric and think numbers. There is so much value to be had in the way that humans just naturally communicate about experience and performance. And there is so much rich data, and I said the word data, that you can get from collecting on an ongoing basis, not quarterly surveys, the kinds of experiences that people inside your company are having, and the experiences that your customers are having. And getting them to interpret their own experience is the key, right? Instead of us being the expert interpreters of that, which, in a research role is often what you're doing, letting these people be the ethnographer of their own experience, doing that at a large quantitative scale, as I mentioned, you suddenly have more reliable data about what it means to be performing a job inside your company than any, Qualtrics or McKinsey-oriented survey might tell you. So there's tons and tons of really good info about that. And I can send you some links you can put in like show notes if you want. But
that would be great.
Yeah.
I would love that. We have to get to the obligatory AI question.
Ass. Just kidding. Go ahead. I'm game. I'll give it a go.
Oh, we talked a little bit about the past. We talked about the present. We should talk about the future.
Future is a man-eating idol, man. I'm an illit, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, this is the hardest question to answer, I think, that I have asked anybody on this show, which is, what happens next? And let me ask you, in particular with you, how do you think it will impact your work?
I'm not really, this is going to sound so stupid. I kind of don't care, and I'm not paying attention to how I think it's going to impact my work in the future. I am paying attention to how it's impacting my work right now. My work, but my clients and my partners' work too. So I do care a lot about it. I'm paying attention to it, and I'm using the tools, and I am definitely in the camp of, I'm a skeptic. I'm a Luddite in some ways. I am also not head in the sand. And I think that AI is not unlike the internet. I think, what a time for us to be alive, Jason, that we get to live through 2 of these giant technological, ontological shifts. What else is coming? 1 was enough for me. Thank you. But yeah, I definitely, I am basically not really spending much energy, we should say, in a predictive mode. And I know you're not like asking literally for predictions, but I don't invest a lot of energy in prediction. in domains where the complexity is high, because it to me seems like a waste of energy, literally. I put my energy more in sensing what is happening immediately right now and the disposition of what I am sensing. So, I think there's a bubble. I think the bubble will be corrected. I don't think AI is going to just like disappear. And I think that probably what will likely happen, here I am contradicting myself, making predictions, is that I think not right now, but eventually organizations will have to kind of figure out how AI fits in an organic way and how to support humans using AI in an organic way, not mandating and not using it as an excuse, to do things they do or don't want to do between layoffs and other things. But I think that's a ways away because we're still in shiny tech mode, and it's such an easy tool for folks who are very techno-centered and future-centered. It's like you can't see anything beyond it. So the prediction I am not even willing to make, but I'm making, is that I think that it's like here to stay. I don't think that it's going to radically overhaul the way that we work with each other in the same way that I don't think the internet did. And you're like, Jen, what are you talking about? Of course the internet did. Nah, humans still interact with each other. Humans still get together to solve problems together. What the internet did was connect us in ways we weren't connected so that information can flow more easily and quickly. And that has had both wonderful, amazing effects, and it also has terrible effects. And I think the same parallel thing will be true with AI. So the answer really is I'm not invested in trying to predict the future. I'm much more interested in paying attention to where it's at right now. And right now, in most of my work and for most of my clients, it truly is still play with this and figure out how to make yourself more efficient. And all it's really doing is making what people already have been doing either a little faster or a little slower, depending on the task. And I think right now it's washing out to about a sum of zero, but for whatever the cost of the AI was, minus whatever the cost of the people they've laid off is. And that calculus works out differently in every organization. So eventually, I think there will be more work to be done in terms of helping organizations reground themselves in good collaboration. But I think that's going to take a little while for people to think about.
Your answer leads really nicely into my last question.
Ooh.
So I do this thing, and I'll ask you for your question once we're off air, but I ask everybody to come up with a question to ask the next guest. And I have a question from a person. His name's Brick Meyer. He's director of L&D at HeatSpring, which does a lot of training for people who are in clean energy, clean technology. Brick's a very thoughtful guy. He had a great question that I thought would be interesting for you to answer. So here's his question. Looking beyond the current AI hype, when will we know that student learning has fundamentally changed because of AI? What might be evidence of that change?
This question takes as a given that AI is going to fundamentally change student learning, doesn't it? I
guess it does.
I don't know. I don't think I grant that.
All right.
I want to honor it.
You don't have to.
But
Rick's not here.
I'll give both sides of the answer. So I don't think that's a given. I actually don't think. But again, somebody who's just sat through this episode kind of already gets the philosophical stance here. So I probably don't have to belabor it. I think that learning is an innate thing that all living, and maybe even non-living, I don't know, things possess. I think that a lot of what we have built as structures for ourselves can sometimes make it hard to stay connected to that innate instinct. Instinct's the word I probably want here. If we didn't have the instinct to learn, then evolution would not happen and nobody would exist. But I think because we have built structures between some forms of schooling and then other parts of how we engage in the world, we kind of disconnect ourselves from that instinct. So a lot of the work I often talk about, people have heard me say, is not teaching anybody anything new. It's more like just reconnecting something that's been disconnected or unkinking the hose so that you get better at learning faster. And then you can be doing all the things we've talked about today inside your org without much help. But to that end, I think that AI simply becomes one of many other tools or interfaces or lenses that we put on the process by which we engage with each other to engage in that adaptation that I talked about earlier. I don't think, this is going to sound insane, but bear with me, I do not think learning has fundamentally changed or will ever fundamentally change when you define it as the core instinct to engage with and respond to and adapt in response to your environment. That's the same for us now as it was millennia ago. So to give AI this like power that it's going to somehow change us at our core evolutionary DNA, I think is, well, wrong. But I also don't think that's what he meant. So if I now honor what the intention is largely like, is AI going to change the way education looks in like modern society? Probably. I think the evidence of it having a fundamental shift for us isn't going to be in like what school looks like or with how, people seek information. I think the real sign would be if we figure out a way to not use AI to replace parts of the human information processing process, but rather to enable more natural human apprenticeships in every way. I don't mean apprenticeship just in trades and stuff, but the most evolutionarily efficient form of learning, cross transgenerational knowledge building in all of our various fields and disciplines always operates in some form of apprenticeship, formal or informal. And I think as long as AI is still replacing people and making that harder, the shift won't be there. But if we can figure out how to have AI make it easier for humans to apprentice with each other, then it will probably satisfy the criteria that I think he was probably asking about. So that's my best attempt.
Thank you. That's great. We've come to the end.
Love it.
This has been great. We could obviously keep going, so we're going to have you back.
Yeah, we'll do a round 2.
We'll do a round 2. But for now, I have to just really express my appreciation for coming on, doing this show with me.
My pleasure.
It's always great to see you, Jen. By the way, our favorite coffee shop, it was rated like 76, like number 76 in the country. It's got some
Really?
flowers recently. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I did not see that.
So we'll have to go and enjoy
that again soon. Yeah, well, anyway. I was going to say, if anybody wants an idea of what coffee chats with me and Jason look like, it was basically this. So
yeah.
And
indeed.
I recognize this one may be a little atypical compared to the other folks you chat with. I don't know. It'll depend on who your other guests are. But I'll be very curious.
From really different backgrounds, actually.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
I'll be back anytime. You know where to find me.
All right. Thank you for listening, and a huge thanks to our guest today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and colleagues. I'm Jason Gorman. I'm the founder and CEO of Jackrabbit Learning Experience, where we help organizations of all kinds make learning better through a clear, repeatable process that is future ready. If any of this resonates with you, just keep tuning in, and please join the community we're building. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye.